welcome back to the Fantasy Pints Podcast in 2022, where we've decided we're going to go for another season. We're bringing it back. It's just I've been waiting 25 minutes to actually launch the thing whilst James finished what he described as a Wigan buffet.
Yeah, a hot pot and a meat pie.
From where, did you say?
It was Galloway's, but other pie shops are available. That's just the one closest to me.
Yeah, I don't know how many people will be familiar with Galloway's. I mean, obviously we are, but is it just a Northwest thing, Galloway's? I don't know. Is it a Wigan thing?
I'm not sure, but Greggs is national, isn't it? It's the equivalent of Greggs. It's the same kind of thing. Pastries and everything else.
Yeah, the Lathams will know where Galloway's is, won't they?
Of course they will. So welcome back to Fantasy Pints 2022. Bigger guests and smaller promises.
That's a great little thing. How long have you been thinking of that?
About 30 seconds. We're making absolutely no commitments as to an upload schedule, but we will be trying to keep it as regular as possible. We are busy men. Yeah,
I think you're probably busier than me, but I've got this little lunchtime slot today with you. So
I'm busier than you from a work perspective, Sean, but you're a social butterfly, so...
Oh, no. Works when I'm busiest, James.
Don't put yourself down.
I won't. Okay, but before we go into the first sort of interview episode, we're going to have a brief look back at season 1, refresh our memories, run through the guests, talk about maybe some of our favourite moments, maybe some of our favourite picks from the question, which of course, for anyone who doesn't know, is if you could go for a drink with any 3 musicians, past or present, who would you choose and why? An absolute thrilling question.
Riveting. 20 guests, or was it 20 episodes, 19 guests last season?
20 episodes, maybe 20 guests if you count the first one that we're about to discuss, because there was 2 guests in one episode.
Yes.
Yeah, because things started with an enigma, shall we say. For anyone that doesn't know, Phoenix Nights, Clinton Baptiste is quite the icon, particularly in the north. It was very fitting for the Northern Chorus link, I thought, but nothing to do with music, as we'll sort of go on to discuss. But James, what are your memories of Clinton?
I recall you and I having a conversation before Clinton joined us. For anyone that's not aware, I say spoiler alert, but the episode's been out for many months now. Clinton Baptiste is a character played by the fantastic Alex Lowe. And Sean in particular, but really both of us, were adamant that it was going to be Clinton in character. And when Alex joined the chat, unfortunately, due to evidently Sean's poor communication skills, Alex was not aware that this was a Clinton exclusive interview, which caused a little bit of confusion at the start, which was quickly sorted out, and Alex was fantastic about it. But it actually ended up it was a great spin, because we didn't have too many questions for Alex, obviously, because we'd centered most of our questions around Clinton. But it led to us having a really kind of candid chat with Alex and asking some great questions and getting to know him and some of the other projects that he's got going on.
Yeah, he was a good talker, wasn't he? Like you say, it did take us by surprise, but we got the first part with Clinton, where he was obviously, we didn't show the video, but obviously most of it's audio anyway. But like you say, we got to know the actual actor, and I've seen him on a few things since. Actually, I've listened to his Rob Brydon podcast. That was good. So a good way to start. A throwaway message it was on Twitter, I think, or an email. I can't remember. Because I think James will probably know, and most people who have been out with me will know I quote a lot of Phoenix Nights. So. It was quite surreal, but it
was a great start.
Yeah, it kind of leads us on to discussing as I mentioned, Clinton's not to do with music, nor is Alex. Obviously, he was a music fan, but the good thing about the podcast, which is different to the website, obviously, where I do interviews, I'll always be interviewing musicians about music, whereas this, led us down a different path where we could speak to different people from different fields, and that was always kind of the aim. And it was shortly after Clinton we actually spoke to Ben Osborne, who was a Premier League footballer at the time. We kind of knew the fate was sealed, so he wasn't going to be a Premier League footballer for too much longer, but we didn't grill him on that. But it was a massive thing had happened in football, hadn't it? Just as we were leading up to it, it was the European Super League.
Yeah, it was really fortunate timing that we got the interview, wasn't it? And just to clarify for anyone who's not aware of kind of football, Ben plays for Sheffield United, who were in the relegation zone, pretty much set to be relegated. It wasn't that Ben's fate was sealed, as Sean put it, for any other reason than that he was obviously is playing for Sheffield United, who were at that point almost inevitably, unfortunately, to be relegated from the Premier League. Ben gave us his perspective on the European Super League. Is that what it was to be called? I can't even remember the name now.
I think it was the European Super League. I think it happened literally days before, but it can't have been actually that long before, because I think it was over in days, wasn't it? But yeah, it was just, again, really interesting to get a footballer's perspective on what was going on in his kind of sport. And I think the reason we got him on is he was running a website during lockdown where he was talking about music, and I remember he was getting behind the Snuts campaign to get number one. So yeah, I'm just glad he joined us. I was going to say glad he enjoyed it. I don't know if he did enjoy it, but he definitely joined us. And yeah, so we had a few other people that were completely outside of music, which was Scheiffer, or should I say, I think you were absent for that one, weren't you, James? That was just myself.
Yeah, I unfortunately missed Schaeffer's pod, which was unfortunate. Couldn't be avoided. It was just an unfortunate set of timings with emergency work commitments for me. And obviously, as you can imagine, Scheiffer Bates being a very, very busy man, we didn't want to kind of mess him around and try and move his podcast date around, which obviously led to my absence. But I did edit the podcast, listen to it as a viewer. It was the first one I'd listened to as a listener rather than a host, and thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought Scheiffer was fantastic. Some of the impressions that he gave us on the pod were fantastic. I particularly liked his multitude of different Alex Turner impressions.
Yeah. He was telling us that he lived not far from Alex Turner in Bethnal Green now, and he went on to, of course, do the American twang, and then I can't quite put my finger on it. I know what you're referring to. He did a few things. Did he do a Bethnal Green Alex Turner or something? He did some kind of variation of a different Alex Turner accent. Yeah. But he did a couple of other impressions as well. So if you don't know who he is, you'll probably recognise his face if you search him on YouTube. He was known for sort of the Game of Thrones impressions, wasn't he? And plenty more.
Gordon Ramsay's another big one.
Yes, Gordon Ramsay. I can't remember whether I got him to do any of his Gordon Ramsay, but it's definitely worth a little listen, I would say. And we ended up actually interviewing a magician towards the end of the it was towards the end of the series, but this one had more of a musical sort of link. He's quite an interesting fellow, wasn't he? Because he's a magician that tours with bands. So he's toured with like Paul Weller and the Libertines, and that's the Magic Mod.
He was a talker. He was a interesting guy. He's got some serious stories, and he actually, as Sean said, he's not a musician, but he's kind of around musicians, but he really gives off like a front man type of charisma, doesn't he?
Yeah, a bit of the LG swagger.
Yeah, you could envisage him as a front man in a band. I thought he was a really cool guy, and he's, as I say, he had some really interesting stories to tell.
Yeah, no, definitely. He's a proper Cockney geezer, as some people may call him. I think he was just had a kid, didn't he? Or was about to, and they've just moved.
Yeah,
I believe he's moved to Northern Ireland now, but don't quote me on that. But yeah, he was brilliant. And another field we went into was ASMR YouTubing. which may sound quite strange, but I knew of Ben Nichols, didn't I? He's my mate from. He was quick to correct me, saying he was my mate, if you remember, because I met him through a friend. And then Ben that's how I introduced him, and Ben was quick to say, well, I actually thought you were my friend, Sean. And it was
you made the unfortunate error of referring to him as a friend of a friend, I think, which Ben wasn't too pleased about. Although he did point out that for me, it works. Friend of a friend, you being his friend, me being yours, would be the correct way to use that. Ben was great, wasn't he? He was really funny. I remember recording that from a hotel room whilst I was working down south, and being concerned that I was going to be upsetting whoever was in the room next to me from laughing quite intensely at times.
Yeah, and for anyone who doesn't know ASMR, I was going to try and think of the what the abbreviation means. I'm not sure if you know, James, but essentially it is it's all about sort of senses, like speaking. And I know Billie Eilish does it in her tracks, and Ben's done that on YouTube for years.
Autonomous sensory meridian response.
Yeah, I'm not too disappointed that I didn't remember that now. That's
no one would blame you. I just Googled it for the purpose of informing the listeners. I did not know that off the top of my head.
But Ben is a really funny guy. So that's definitely worth a listen. It's definitely one of the highlight episodes of the series. I remember his picks and his description of the pub being particularly good. So go and check that one out. And he wasn't the first person that we kind of knew beforehand. James, you want to say a bit about Jake and Dave, how you knew them?
Yeah, we'll move on to that. But before we do, I've still not let it go, and I will not let it go with Ben Nichols that Foster's is his pint of choice. Yeah. So Ben, if you're listening to this, do better. Do better, mate.
And I know for sure that Ben's not short of a penny or two, so the fact that he drinks Foster's absolutely astounds me. But
Jake and Dave, two kind of local musicians that I know. Dave is from St. Helens, which is where Sean and I are from the quaint village of Rainford.
Lovely place.
He's lovely place. And he's the bubble, you might call it. He's really involved in the kind of local cover music scene, plays in all the pubs and bars around the Northwest, plays weddings and whatnot. And it was nice to speak to Dave to kind of get a little bit of insight into and have a chat with him about the state of when I say the state of, it makes it sound like it's a bad thing, but where the live music scene is at a local level. And again, we had a really good chat with him. He's kind of, his music is more focused on I'd say rock than kind of any other genre, but he does dip his toe in and is quite interested in a lot of other genres, and it did lead on to some interesting conversations.
Yeah, definitely. It was obviously the time of COVID when it had absolutely hampered people's income who were playing like you'll know yourself, obviously, James. So it was. I even rebranded the episode as a local music special because it honed in particularly on that. And I remember we were. There was a couple of highlights came from that episode, but we are going to discuss season highlights, and if it doesn't come up later, I'll be very astounded. So
I suspect it will.
We'll wait.
I suspect it will. So we'll leave that there. But Dave was fantastic, and again, it was a podcast slightly different to a lot of the others because it really did home in on and focus on the struggles that local musicians were having around, obviously, the COVID-19 situation, which, touch wood, I'm hoping we're out of the woods with.
Just got to focus on the World War now.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll not go, we're not going to go into that on this. But
this is not a political podcast.
Jake, but yeah, Jake Heaton was also someone you knew from a similar scene to Dave. I've never met either of them, but I'm assuming they might know each other too. I don't know.
No, Jake and Dave don't know each other to my knowledge. I know Jake from the Chorley music scene.
The infamous Chorley music scene.
Famous Chorley music scene. Because I used to run a couple of open mics down there. And a few years ago when Jake was quite a young, ambitious, sprightly lad, he would come down to my open mics and play some of his tunes and whatnot. And he also gigged in a couple of the bars that I gigged in as well. So got to know him that way. Really, really cool guy. Actually, weirdly, at the time of recording, in the last few weeks, I've been speaking to Jake a lot because you'll notice from the podcast, he was living in and studying music in London at a uni. I can't remember which uni he was at. He's moved back up north now. I'm yet to actually meet up with him and have a coffee or a pint as we planned so that he can tell me why. But he's now studying business at Edge Hill, living in Ormskirk. And he messaged me a few weeks ago to ask me to try and get him a few gigs in Liverpool city centre. So I did, because I knew he'd go down the Storm. And now he's playing very regularly in various Irish bars and whatnot around the city centre. So more updates to come on the Jake Heaton situation and why he left London when I managed to find an hour to catch up with him properly.
Yeah, we'll find out that in the near future then. I thought he was a really good talker. I remember him. He was holding a mic, wasn't he? He was holding.
He was, yeah. He had it was a Shure SM58, which is apt for an artist because that is one of the most commonly used and kind of highly regarded as the best in class microphone that you can get for live performance. Although
you're going to say it was apt because it was SM and my name that's my initials, but
I was not going to say that, but you could say that about this little SM7 that I'm using.
Yes, you could indeed.
The Sean Marsh 7.
Yeah, the new CR7.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you don't quite play football the same way, but you're close.
Close.
Yeah,
I'll get there. I'll get there on a Wednesday night.
Yeah, although confusingly, I did pop into one of Jake's gigs yesterday on the way to one of mine or the day before, and he does not use that microphone for live performance. So unless it's broke,
purely podcast interviews, that one's for.
Must be, yeah. Keeps it there for when he's a guest on prestigious podcasts such as ours. Fantastic guy, great episode, really good talker. Talks a lot about the London scene, because obviously he was down there at the time and really trying to kind of ingrain himself in that and get himself involved in it. Jake's got his own music on Spotify. He does plug it in the podcast. If you haven't listened to it, go and listen to him. Jake Heaton, Inside Jessica's Notebook is his album. It's fantastic.
I remember the concept being quite interesting, and he tells us all about that too.
He does, yeah.
I think it's interesting that you say that he went on to perform in some bars in Liverpool, because a nice segue into some other local musicians we interviewed. Well, the first one was Joe Astley, who was from Wigan, who also went on to start playing at Cavern Club, didn't he?
Yeah, so he's now, to my knowledge, a resident at the Cavern on Wednesdays and Sundays. So he seems to be enjoying that. All the best to him, and great stuff.
Yeah.
He gave us a scare, didn't he, Joe?
He did. He was out handing signed vinyls at the exact time our podcast started, and it was only our second one. And it kind of, at that point, we were very rigid on the Thursday release.
Yeah. We had. I think we had a cancellation already, so we were flapping trying to make sure that we had an episode to go out, and we were dead set on recording Joe on the Monday so that I had time to edit it to get it out on the Thursday. And as Sean said, Joe was handing out signed vinyls for his new release. But thankfully, he did rearrange for us for, was it the next day or was it later on?
It was the next day. So
Yeah.
we managed to sort it. So it was all good.
Yeah.
Like we said, we've interviewed quite a few up and coming musicians. We went on to interview Felix Hill, who was he was studying at the time, wasn't he? He was at college, and he's from Manchester.
Yeah.
He's also since released a great single, Vodka Lemonade, I think it was called, a catchy number. So you can go and check that out. Do you remember your?
Yeah, we'll bring that up later.
Okay. We'll come back on. James did a bit of a. Oh, well, it wasn't a blunder, but it was just a
stupid comment. It was just ridiculous thing that didn't need to be said. Yeah.
Yeah, but we're going to talk about some of the things that didn't go so well at the end of the podcast. But yeah, definitely worth a listen. Felix Hill. We interviewed Megan Wynn, who was just moving over to Manchester, actually, who'd only released one single, Polaroid, but has literally, I think, on Friday just released the follow-up, which is Better Review. She's got massive fans with This Feeling, who are good people to have on board. They sort of promote new music. So yeah, I think she's on quite a few festival lineups this summer as well. So again, go and listen to Megan Wynn, Better Review, which is the new single, and obviously listen to the podcast too.
Yeah.
And Abbey Rose Kelly, do you remember that one? It's quite apt for this, because if this was the only other time I was recording in this conservatory.
Was that? I knew there was one episode. I couldn't remember who it was. Yeah, Abbey Rose Kelly. It was shortly before she was due to headline Riverfest, wasn't it?
Yeah, Riverfest, the Warrington one, it was after River Reeves, wasn't it? It was at Viola Beach. So yeah, it was good chat. I remember it was the first one actually where she'd mentioned one of her picks for the question, and neither of us knew him by name. I think it was the 21 Pilots lead singer.
Yes.
And I think there was just a brief moment where we were both sort of, are we going to have to pretend we know him? And then fortunately she
did elaborate.
Yeah. I think we only actually discussed in the outro, didn't we? It was like, I'm glad she went into that, because no idea who that name was. Obviously, music website, talking about music on the podcast. We had a couple of other people on, and as part of the work I do for the website, I went to 110 Above Festival, which is sort of Leicestershire way, and saw two of the people we'd interviewed. In fact, one of the bands played quite a big role in the festival, so we'll come on to them in a minute. But the first one was Lauren Hibbard, who's a singer from the Isle of Wight. She's got millions of streams, and I think got quite a promising career ahead. It was just before the Goober EP. She was telling us about her Goober merch and cabbage pillows, if I remember correctly?
Yeah. Because I recall I recorded this one from my car, from the cockpit.
Of course you did. Yes, I remember that. Yeah, because you were out gigging. Yeah.
So I think I was just before I was set to run down into the city for a gig. Didn't want to cancel it, and I obviously didn't want to back out when it was possible that I could do it. So I have a little microphone that like plugs into your phone just so you get slightly better audio. It wasn't perfect, and I used my phone for the interview. She was great, really nice girl, wasn't she? Very talented as well, and again, seeing her on quite a few festival lineups over last summer and again this summer, so it's great. Power to her.
Yeah. Power to her. Power to the people. But like, I think it just I completely forgot about you recording in a car. I think I've always been very, very stuck in that in my flat usually, aren't I, with the background of the Venetian
blinds.
But yeah, it looks much better. Looks more scenic, more alive in sunny St Helens than in that little room. But yeah, the One Temple Festival. Sorry, go on.
If I look at you long enough, it almost looks like a background that you've set.
Well, don't tell them that.
Kind of expecting like half of your shoulder to disappear, and it kind of blends into the background.
I can confirm. Imagine if it did, then it just went straight back. But yeah, 110 Above. Lauren performed on Elizabeth stage, which is what is now going to be the main stage, and she was good. She was brilliant. And Deco, who are a band that perform in sort of 80s mashup covers, we interviewed those as well, or at least Max, the lead singer. And at that festival, they did like secret sets the night before sort of the main bit of the music. It was like they were an integral part of the festival. You could tell that the festival loved them. And then they had to shoot off to go and support Culture Club, I think it was, in Scarborough. And then we're straight back to play like the main set. They were just always talking to people around the festival. And I think from what you remember of Max, he was a nice guy, wasn't he, to talk to? Really good.
Yeah, he was great. He was a really nice fella. And we kind of went into his live shows, because obviously they've got a lot of original music, and they try best as possible not to put too much of an emphasis in the live shows on the covers and stuff, and really trying to promote the original stuff. And he was talking about his changing kind of demographics, or their changing demographic, when comparing the mashups and the covers and stuff to the growth of his original stuff. It was a really interesting chat. Yeah, a really, really interesting chat.
It was good. And another sort of group of people that are to do with music, but not necessarily musicians themselves. We had 4 radio DJs on, and I think
DJs.
I think the first one was Jim from Jim Salverson, and I think we instantly sort of were amazed with sort of his knowledge. I think it was like his professionalism, which was kind of the opposite to us. He had his full setup, just sounded exactly.
And you can really tell when someone is on the radio when they jump on a podcast. He spoke so clearly. Didn't do that. Didn't say didn't pause. Didn't stumble on his words. And he was fantastic. I thought he was really good.
Yeah, and he also, I believe, could have been responsible for us not changing the thing, but we sort of molded it to start asking people where they'd take people, the setting. And I think it's because I can't remember if we asked him or not, or whether he just said it. And it was Dave Grohl he was talking about, but he said he imagined being sat back in I think it was like a New York bar.
Yeah.
With, I think, a bottle of Brooklyn, maybe Brooklyn Mark or something.
I think he just volunteered it, and it gave us the idea. Ripped you off, Jim. Sorry. It just gave us the idea to start actually asking the question, because it did bring up obviously an extra interesting element to the concept.
Yeah, and then we went on to interview Jack Wood from Radio X, who when we asked him for 3 musicians, past or present, he kind of just instantly went, "Right, I've heard your concept. I'm changing it." he just kind of took the law into his own hands. I think he then said the Liam Gallagher thing, where he's like, obviously everyone's going to pick Liam Gallagher, but I'm just assuming he's going to be there, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's another thing we took forward when someone wanted to pick him. We just said no, he's there.
Yeah, he's going to be in the pub, isn't he? Loves a sesh. So
yeah, but Jack was brilliant. It always makes me chuckle thinking back to when we posted the snippets teaser.
Yeah, he shared it to say he looks and sounds insane.
Yeah, he said, I didn't realise there'd be a video version of this as well, but I look deranged.
Yeah.
But, he's a really funny guy, though. Another DJ was Katie Owen, who has certainly gone on to... By the way, I'm not saying that it was any platform springboard or anything, but she's got some massive gigs since then. She went on to be on the Kasabian sort of tour.
Could be a coincidence, or it could be Northern Chorus propelling DJs' careers. Who knows? Should
be the tagline.
Yeah, who knows?
But she just done the Sefton Park gig, hadn't she, in Liverpool, which was the comeback show with Lavams, Blossoms, and Zuzu, and we spoke to her just after that, and yeah, she was really good.
That summer, she went on to announce on the main stage, there were two main stages, weren't there, at Leeds this year? Main stage East, I think. I'm guessing it's 50-50. She was announcing on one of the main stages, and on one of the days, Sunta Templeton was doing the other ad. I thought she'd have been at Reading, but she was not. And Katie. Obviously, I saw her there. She did a great job doing that. Fantastic to see her succeeding. And again, power to her.
Propelling DJ's careers now. Absolutely nothing to do with us. But
toured with Kasabian recently too, hasn't she?
That's sort of, I briefly mentioned that, but she was essentially a support. It was kind of where a support slot would be, but she was just DJing, sort of getting the crowd warmed up. And I saw her do that at Victoria Warehouse, and she's obviously making a name for herself now. I think she's kind of one of the go-to indie DJs now for events and festivals.
And by the looks of it, a Fred Perry model too. #ad.
Well, Fred Perry everywhere in India, aren't they? They're Is it Fred Perry subculture? We have the
yes, yeah. But, send us some merch.
Hattie was the other Hattie Pearson was the other radio DJ, and she was the first person to come on with no camera, and it kind of again caught us off guard because we were here with the other square on the Zoom, but no face.
I'd actually forgotten that Hattie had no camera because, as you mentioned Hattie there, I was my brain was trying to remember the pod and remember what she looked like, and I couldn't, and I was getting confused, and that's why. Makes sense.
She's responsible for like the co-op playlists, and she gets loads of new bands on and stuff like that. And again, just a really good talker. You can tell why they're in the profession that they are. And the final two podcasts were potentially two of the biggest guests. Well, I'd say the final one was definitely one of the biggest guests. Episode 19 was Jamie Webster, which, for anyone who doesn't know, he's got a Liverpool Arena show coming up. So I think a lot of people will know his name now, but he started off touring with Liverpool Football Club. Where we go to all the away games.
And he played in all the fan zones and stuff, singing all of the Liverpool FC fan songs and whatnot.
Yeah, but he's managed to carve out his own career now. He's managed to completely put that to one side, kind of, and establish himself as a musician in his own right.
Yeah, he's got a huge following in Liverpool City and outside of it too. He's doing the arena tour, the arena gig in Liverpool, but I'm pretty sure he's playing a lot of venues outside of the city as well.
Yeah.
He talks a lot about trying to how his kind of battle with and the way that he feels that he's succeeding in pushing aside the football politics and bringing Everton fans effectively on his side with songs like This Place, and he was a really good guest. He was great. He was funny. What did he call you, Sean? Soft lad?
He told me soft lad. He said, "Don't worry, soft lad." I can't remember. But and
be soft or something. He said,
we mentioned how he should be getting on the big festival stages, and then he was literally announced for Neighbourhood Weekend of the week after, wasn't he? So
kept that tucked right under his belt, or he didn't know. I doubt
onwards and upwards. I think. He's just released his album Moments as well, which is great. So always worth a listen. And the final guest was DMA's Matt Mason from DMA's, which was quite. I don't know how much you listen to them, James, but I think for me, they're one of the leading names in indie. I think that might be how I describe them. Anyway,
I agree. Yeah,
obviously from Australia. So I interviewed. They'd just come back over. I think they'd been at Chorlton Water Park, which was just around the corner from my house, if I remember correctly. And he was very jet lagged. But yeah, it was just, for me, it was the perfect way to end the series with someone as big as that. And unfortunately, James, that was the second one that you couldn't attend.
Yeah, that was my second absence. Two of the bigger, more globally recognized guests that we've had, I couldn't attend. And I promise it's not because Sean doesn't trust me not to ruin it. Genuinely, there were legitimate reasons for my absence. Yeah. But we're going to try to make sure that that does not happen for season 2. Although, again, no promises.
No.
But we're hoping that a slightly less rigid upload schedule should make for better quality videos and, most importantly, 100% host attendance.
Yes, fingers crossed. And I do have a few names up my sleeve. I'd never want to. I think I've mentioned a few to you, James. So fingers crossed we'll get a couple of big names on for season 2 as well. After this episode, it's going to go straight into the second episode officially, I suppose, of season 2, but the first interview with a guest. But before we do that, James, I want you to pick first of all, I want your favourite person that was picked as a fantasy pint.
Okay. Now, I did have 2 picks for this, but I think one of them is going to be brought up in a separate section in a moment. So I will keep that to one side. And I am going to pick, and it's not an uncommon pick. I've not picked it because I thought it was unusual or fascinating. I've picked it because of this person's reasons behind picking it, and the one quote that just stuck in my head, and still kind of rings around in my head now. And it was Jack Wood picking Damon Albarn, obviously of Blur and subsequently Gorillaz fame. I really like the Gorillaz, listen to the Gorillaz quite a lot. Not as big on Blur, but do like a few of the tunes. But the way that Jack Wood described his reasons for which he effectively put Damon Albarn on a pedestal were fascinating and really inspired me to go back and listen to loads of Blur and continue to listen to Gorillaz. And the sentence that sticks in my head is, he said, "The man writes pop. You can't deny him. The man writes pop like no other." Something along those lines. And I thought, I'm on board with that. That's great. And I thought that was a really good pick because he took what was probably a common choice, but gave a really good reason as to why he was picking him.
Yeah, and I think he did do that with some of his other mentions as well. I think he was good, and I'd kind of forgotten about that quote until you said it, but it does ring a bell now. If I had to choose one, and I don't know if this was picked as a fantasy pint or not, but the one I remember is Magic Mod talking about Shane McGowan, because he said, I think I remember him saying he had actually met him in an airport and maybe been offered a pint, but he was going to be late. He'd gone and stopped him, and something along the lines of he was just everything kind of expected him to be was what I remember him saying. And it was the second time Shane had been mentioned on the podcast as well, and probably not the last.
Yeah,
I wouldn't have thought, but that was the one that kind of sticks in my head, as well as obviously Ben Nichols picking Michael Bolton. But
I wasn't sure if you were going to bring that up.
I wonder if he ever will go to that show or did go to that show. He was saying he was going watching him with his mother, wasn't he? So if he did, I hope he loved it. And then finally, what was your favourite? There was in fact, I was going to call it favourite moment, but a lot of things maybe didn't go as to plan as we would have liked. So I think favourite moment.
Rather than pick a favourite moment, why don't we just talk about a few of the funny things that have happened along the way during season 1, a couple of the blunders. Because favourite moment, I can't necessarily think of one off the top of my head.
Not the best thing to say about your own podcast.
No, I'm joking. What I mean is, it could be, favourite moment could be something funny, or it could be something inspirational or whatever else. And off the top of my head, there were that many different individual moments and things that are swimming around that I think would be better addressing the many, briefly addressing the many comical and notable moments that we did have throughout the seasons in no particular order.
Yeah. But you say in no particular order, but the first one that comes to mind is the one from the very first episode where you ended up smashing a plate at the end of the recording.
Yeah. Was it the end of the recording or was it the beginning? I can't remember.
Have been the beginning, but I know you used it as the end.
I put it in at the end, but I actually think that, so Sean and I had this concept. We were gonna start the podcast. We were going to record the intro. I think we recorded it the day before we spoke to Clinton and Alex. And, excitement was high. We were really looking forward to getting involved and getting this done. We were just sat on a Zoom chat talking about a brief structure for the introductory episode whilst I was finishing my pizza. And just as we were about to start and Sean was about to say the first words of what became the very first podcast episode, I dropped the plate, smashed it in about 5 pieces.
It felt like it could have been symbolic for how things were going to go.
Yeah.
But it was then, as you said, used as a cheeky little outro for the episode. But it was a great way to start. What's your other thoughts of things that go wrong? Because I've got one more in my head in particular.
Okay, things that go wrong. I don't know if we're thinking of the same one, but for me, it's, as I alluded to earlier, was Dave Quilliam's understanding of the concept. So, as I'm hoping by now listeners are aware, the concept is 3 musicians, past or present, that you would like to have a pint with. Dave believed the concept to be musicians past, present, or future, and that you were to have one of each. And I can't recall Dave's picks off the top of my head, aside from that his pick for the future was Bill and Ted, or Bill or Ted. One of the two.
Yeah. I believe it is a popular film franchise, but neither of us have watched it, have we?
Nope.
But that was beside the point. It was the fact that he thought, for some reason, we wanted people to pick past, present, and future.
Yeah, and there was a small section on the podcast. I think this was on air, where we went through the messages between myself and Dave, just to confirm to Dave that I never once told him that it was past, present, or future, and Dave did eventually concede to that, but stuck with Bill and Ted as his choice in any event, which was great.
He did. And before we go and move on to the next episode, I have actually remembered that earlier we alluded to the fact we'd bring up your silly comment that you made at Felix. So that's a fitting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So if you haven't watched the Felix Hill episode, go and watch it. Felix had a lovely background in what I'm assuming is his bedroom. And behind him were a few posters, and we were talking about, did he bring up, was it Paul McCartney that he mentioned? Or was it John Lennon? It was one of the Beatles he brought up, I think.
It might have been Arctic Monkeys.
Or maybe somebody, on whoever it was, he had a poster behind him on, well, this is the point. He had a poster behind him, and I addressed the fact that he had mentioned his pick, obviously having had a poster of the person he'd picked behind him, just in case there were any audio-only listeners. And I used the phrase, now you have a poster of that person behind you on what I'm assuming is a wall.
Yeah, it just felt like an odd. I think we all just stopped, and it was just like,
yeah,
it was kind of because
what else would it be? It was just a ridiculous thing to say.
It was just kind of like it represented someone who was just new to this sort of thing, and but I mean, I don't know,
still new, still learning, and still loving it.
But we this is going to go straight into season 2. So we would, again, the one thing we're not promising is a fixed schedule, but one thing we are promising is a variety of guests from different fields, plenty from music again, but we're going to try our hand at different people to make things a bit more interesting. Keep people on their toes. What was your line earlier, James? Propelling DJs' careers?
Propelling DJs' careers. Northern Chorus, propelling DJs' careers since 2021. Bigger guests, smaller promises.
Straight into it.